Hello everyone, and welcome to the 282nd episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring the characters and themes of GTA 4. But wait, why am I using Yusuf for the intro? Well, because Yusuf is me. That's right, baby. It's nice to see some proper, non-stereotypical Arab representation in media. What, you thought this beard, these eyebrows, this rug, and this bald head came from pure luck? No, this is 100% Arabian made. Well, 50% at least. Just take it from my main lady here, Dusty Gazangas. Jokes aside though, welcome everybody to a long-awaited episode of Analyzing Evil, another patron pick that I'm sure many of you are happy to see featured in this series. And if you'd like to become a part of the process of picking one of the characters or pieces of media I cover each month, as well as getting my videos ad-free, uncensored, and a day early for as low as $2 a month, consider signing up to become a patron over on Patreon. So as I mentioned a moment ago, this video is going to be centered around the characters and themes of GTA 4. And so this video is going to be structured a little differently than some of my other episodes. Just so you know, we won't be examining any information that we can find in GTA 5 or GTA Online that has anything to do with the characters I'm covering in this video. But when I do get to GTA 5, which I will soon enough, as the patrons chose GTA 5 to be covered as well, we'll talk about anything that happens to anyone who appears here then, and you can expect that video to be out sometime in November. We'll start off by talking about Niko Bellic, then move on to cover each major character in this story in some capacity, before we touch on some of the overarching themes of this story in general, and those that tie these characters together towards the end of the video. But we have a long way to go before we get there, and before we get started, let's take a moment to talk about our sponsor for this video, Manta Sleep. Next to a healthy diet and exercise, sleep is the most important thing we need to ensure both our physical and mental health remain in good shape. But if you find yourself constantly waking up from unwanted light or noise disturbing your rest, then Manta Sleep has exactly what you need. Manta offers 8 different styles of sleep masks that gives all types of sleepers the eye protection needed to make your dreaming hours as peaceful as possible. And all of Manta's masks feature unparalleled adjustability, a premium feel, and pro-nap movement that can soothe your eyes as they protect them if you choose their steam or cool masks, or even your ears with the sound mask and its built-in Bluetooth headphones, which is the one I personally use, and I can't sleep without now that it's improved my quality of sleep exponentially. But if the sound mask isn't for you, then a couple other products Manta offers can easily help keep your ears protected while you sleep. Their white noise machine and earplugs. The white noise machine is this compact little device that features tactile movement, so you can easily adjust between 15 different sounds, even while in the dark. And their earplugs are the most comfortable and soundproof I've ever used. And they work hard to block out all those little sounds that keep you awake, but not so much that you can't hear your alarm when it's time to get up, which is nothing short of perfection. With an amazing selection of products in such high quality, Manta is hard to beat, so I encourage you to browse their website and pick through all the different features of the products they offer to find the one that best suits your needs, or the needs of someone dear to you that could use a little more rest as well, as no matter what your sleeping schedule is, I guarantee anything Manta has to offer is only going to improve your quality of sleep in ways you thought weren't possible. Summer is here and the sun's brighter than ever, so it's more important than it ever was to get some protection from light and sound. So if you're like me and the slightest sound and tiniest pinprick of light disturbs your slumber, head over to mantasleep.com and use the code VIOLET at checkout to get 10% off your order and enhance your sleeping experience today. Thank you Manta Sleep for sponsoring this video. Now without further ado, let's begin. The world that each and every one of us is born into is dictated by chance. Some of us luck out and are born citizens of the most powerful and prosperous nations in the world in the midst of golden ages. Others are born into struggling nations on the decline that are dominated by hardship and suffering. And Niko Bellic was born in one such place. Niko was born in the year 1978 in Yugoslavia, which was arguably one of the worst time periods for a citizen of that country to be born into. Yugoslavia was created in the aftermath of World War I as the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, becoming Yugoslavia in 1929, and finally after World War II, the Federal People's Republic of Yugoslavia, a communist nation part of the non-aligned movement that was led for nearly 40 years by Josip Broz Tito. Initially, the country was held together by the idea that South Slavic people are of one blood and should be united into one nation, with the struggles of Yugoslav partisans during World War II further uniting them under their magnanimous leader. But like so many countries held together by threads, the various peoples that made up Yugoslavia were not united by dreams of unity, continued economic prosperity, or even of a socialist utopia, but by their leader, a strong man who by all accounts was an anomaly of a dictator whose unique persona facilitated the unity of so many different ethnic groups under one banner. So once Tito passed in 1980 as an economic decline began to take hold, it was all but assured that this union, like so many other communist countries of that era, would eventually fracture and break for good. This is the world that Niko Bellic was born into, a world where his people would begin to experience newfound hardships that doubtlessly contributed to his father making things only worse for his family as he descended into alcoholism and began to abuse them, with a young boy with dreams of being an astronaut forced to stand by as that dream steadily became an unreachable fantasy. By the time Yugoslavia officially broke up in June of 1991, Niko was 13 years old, and when the ethnic tensions and small conflicts that contributed to that breakup inevitably led to war, Niko was all but assured to become a participant in that war. The story of Grand Theft Auto 4 begins in 2008, and at one point, Niko claims that he was betrayed 10 years ago, which would mean he was a soldier when he was 18 years old. Though that's true, if you choose to spare Darko at the end of the game, Bernie states the following.
Florian, I thought I should let you know. I found Darko. The guild has destroyed him. I don't know. Somehow, it was better to walk away.
You know what? I'm really proud of you, Niko Bellic. After what we've had to live with these last 12 or 13 years.
While this could contradict Niko's statement that he was betrayed 10 years ago, what Bernie was likely referring to here was their entire service in the armed forces and all the horrors they had to witness during it, not just the incident with Darko, which indicates that Niko probably enlisted in the army when he was 15 or 16, which means that he most likely experienced all the terrible things the Yugoslav wars had to offer in the 2 or 3 years leading up to his enlistment in the Serbian army, afterwards both experiencing and unleashing even more terror than he'd witnessed up to that point. Destroyed homes, slain children, violated women, all the horrors of war right before his eyes, and sometimes at his hands. Even though that's true, it's often the more personal tragedies that we experience that break us in ways others can't. And so it was when Niko was betrayed by Darko Breivik on that fateful day in 1998. Breivik, along with Niko and Florian, now Bernie Crane, were members of a 15-man squad made up of young men from their village, and on that day, they were sent to ambush a rival squad that had supposedly killed a lot of innocent people. But when they arrived, it was they who were ambushed, and all of them were killed, save for Niko, Bernie, and Darko. This, along with everything he'd been through up to that point, broke Niko, with his mind reeling as he tried to figure out which of his friends betrayed the rest of them. And with a jaded and cynical worldview now backed up by an intense desire for revenge against the man or men who had set him and his friends up, firmly cemented in his heart, revenge became his sole purpose in life. So for a while, Niko did the only thing he knew how to do. He pursued lines of work mired in violence, taking jobs in the European underworld that eventually landed him a stint in prison, becoming after his sentence the employee of a man by the name of Ray Bulgarin as a human trafficker. After a ship sank carrying a load of human cargo and Niko escaped, Bulgarin blamed Niko, and so he signed up for the merchant navy to elude him, and after corresponding for many years with his cousin Roman, he decided to make his way to the land of opportunity to join his cousin in supposed decadence in Liberty City. However, though the land of opportunity has traditionally been seen as a place that guarantees things like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, everyone is granted these things in varying degrees, with some people enjoying all that America has to offer with little to no downsides, and others only catching glimpses of them as they struggle to eke out an existence, something Niko learns all too well not long after he arrives here. When Niko meets up with Roman to begin his new life, he quickly discovers that what Roman had promised him all these years was nothing but a lie. And more than that, a lie that in fact promised he'd be falling back into the criminal lifestyle he had escaped not too long ago. However, that wasn't exactly a bad thing as far as Niko was concerned, as Niko did not come to America just to find a better life with his cousin, but to continue his search for the men who had betrayed his friends. And it's this drive that is the primary reason why Niko Bellic commits the acts of evil he does in this story. And that was true even before he arrived here, as when he was a human trafficker working for Bulgarin, Niko never cared what he did, and furthermore, he didn't care because the only thing he did care about was finding out whether it was Florian or Darko who set up his other friends. So no matter what it took or what it takes to get him even an inch closer to finding the culprit, Niko is willing to do it. Now aside from this lust for vengeance, Niko Bellic is the man that you'd likely expect him to be after enduring the things he's endured. He's not exactly sullen, but there's a certain melancholy about him that follows him wherever he goes, as though we do witness Niko experiencing joy at various points in this story. More often than not, Niko is rather matter-of-fact, blunt, and muted, a man who is able to find levity when he's able to, but one who can't help but fall back into the misery that constantly clouds his mind whenever he isn't distracted. Niko is also quite pessimistic and apathetic at times as well, as even though he claims that his experiences taught him to appreciate life, he also mentions to Playboy X during a mission that he doesn't care if he lives or dies, and he's rather negative when it comes to various aspects of society and people in general. But he is able to see the silver lining when he's placed into less than desirable situations, which we see after he rescues Roman after he's been kidnapped by Dimitri Rascalov's men, and recounts to him a story about a bar that was destroyed back home, and how they drank the last bottle of vodka left there despite it all, to cheer him up. When it comes to the crimes he commits and the violence he unleashes, he's merciless, but typically not more than he needs to be, though we do find him making jokes about the suffering he causes from time to time, showing us that over the years, Niko has developed a certain amount of sadism that in many ways seems only natural for a person who's lived amongst violence and death for so long. But as we've already touched on, that sadism was instilled within him by horror, and it's not the product of a man who inherently delights in inflicting violence upon others.
When the war came, I did bad things. And after the war, I thought nothing of doing bad things. I killed people, smuggled people, sold people.
And you don't worry about your soul?
After you walk into a village, and you see 50 children, all sitting neatly in a row against the church wall, each with their throats cut and their hands chopped off, you realize that the creature that could do this doesn't have a soul.
In order to fight the soulless, Niko relinquished some of his own soul, carrying with him a great weight as he endeavored to bring justice to the people responsible for killing his friends. However, whatever weight Niko carries with him has never burdened him so much that he forgets why he's so hell-bent on pursuing the man who betrayed his friends. A love so deep and a loyalty so steadfast to the people he cares for, friends and family alike. For though Niko is pursuing these men to satisfy his own desire for revenge, he's mostly doing so to avenge those that died as a result of his betrayal. As for Niko Bellic, the most important things to him are the people closest to him, to the point that when Mikhail Faustin accuses him of being disloyal, he immediately feels insulted. And despite how blunt and cynical he can be, he does make an effort to shelter those he loves from the various horrors of reality, which is shown to us through the lie he tells Roman about his mother, as Niko told him that she died in a house fire, but in reality, she was assaulted and murdered during the war. It's this love he holds for them that serves as his best and most admirable quality. For though he does commit terrible acts of evil in order to achieve his vengeance, one can't help but sympathize with the man who would stop at nothing to bring what he believes to be justice to the man who took those closest to him, even if that justice ultimately brings incredible and inexcusable harm to hundreds of people, the people closest to him, and himself. Now there are dozens of characters that Niko interacts with throughout this story, and we'll be talking about the evil of the more prominent ones soon enough. But it's not necessary that we go into detail about every single thing he does for or with all of them while talking about Niko to understand the level of evil within his character. Rather, it's important that we establish what Niko does for most of them while pointing out the particularly egregious actions he takes while in their service or working with them. Now, Niko primarily associates with career criminals, gangsters and drug dealers who Niko frequently conducts business with throughout this story to either get closer to finding Darko or to enrich himself so he can acquire more resources to do much the same. And while some of these characters are worse than others, they're all criminals that only damn Niko further by association and through the actions he takes as he works with or for them. And those people include Ray Bulgarin, Vladimir Glebov, Mikhail Faustin, Dimitri Rascalov, Jimmy Pegorino, Phil Bell, Ray Bacino, Jon Gravelli, Brucie Kibbutz, Manny Escuela, Johnny Klebitz, Little Jacob, Badman, Playboy X, Elizabeta Torres, Dwayne Forge, and the McRearys brothers. While working with or for any of these characters, Niko commits crimes ranging anywhere from assault and theft to bank robbery and murder. And while a good majority of these crimes fall under the category of crimes committed whilst playing the criminal game, like stealing from, assaulting, or murdering rival gangsters, crimes that, while not excusable, are less egregious due to the fact that they're committed against people who have more or less agreed to play this game, where the unspoken rules stipulate that all manner of harm can come to them at any time, they are still crimes nonetheless that bring great harm to not just the people they're committed against, but any innocents who might happen to get in the way. As though there aren't really any verifiable instances of civilians being harmed during any of the mainline missions, unless you choose to harm them yourself. it's still reasonable to assume that the various shootouts and bombings Niko is involved in cause the harm or death of innocents along the way, which is one of, if not the greatest pitfalls of criminality. However, there are a few times where Niko technically harms or kills people that are playing the criminal game, or are at least adjacent to it, that are less excusable. Like when he kills Bucky Sligo and his associates, as well as Aiden O'Malley, on behalf of Derek McReary, as both Bucky and Aiden claim they were sent to prison because Derek ratted on them. And while Derek claims he didn't, it's not unreasonable to assume that he did indeed inform on them. And if he did, that means they were both incarcerated and killed because of Derek, and by proxy, Niko, which in my mind isn't exactly the same thing as killing another gangster who's actively participating in the game. The other crime he commits that doesn't really fall under that category is his kidnapping of Gracie Ancelotti. As though she is the daughter of a crime boss and likes to partake in illegal substances, she didn't deserve to be kidnapped to be used as leverage against her father. And the fact that Niko is willing to beat and kidnap a woman to further his own aims is quite the slight against his character. Though the fact that he was comfortable trafficking people in the past already clued us into his willingness to harm innocents in this way for his own sake. That being said, there are crimes Niko commits while working for or with these criminal elements that cannot be justified in any way, and those are the murders he commits against various security guards and cops throughout this story. Now, as we learn throughout this story, there are some rather unsavory characters employed by the rather ineffective LCPD, but the fact remains that not all cops are bad cops, and though some might be, the vast majority of them do not deserve to be shot in the head as they attempt to stop other people from committing misdeeds. Like when Niko joins the McReary brothers on a bank robbery and is forced to murder dozens of police officers to escape. Just like the collateral or intentional damage one causes to innocents when committing crimes, this is another of the greatest pitfalls of criminality, as where there are criminals, there are people who are going to attempt to stop them from committing crimes, and the fact that anyone has to lose their life because someone was out to enrich or empower themselves, or in this case, pursue one man for the sake of revenge, is horrific. But aside from officers of the law and security guards, is there anyone else Niko harms that aren't playing the criminal game? No, not directly, but there is one instance of Niko assisting someone who does, Jeff Harlingford, a person we can encounter randomly whilst playing the game. Jeff is a deeply insecure and paranoid man who suspects his wife of cheating on him, so he tasks Niko with spying on her to find out if she is. When he does, Niko discovers that she isn't cheating. Rather, she's confiding in a friend of hers who definitely wants her, but who she doesn't entertain romantically in the slightest. Definitive proof that she's being faithful to her husband. All seems well when we tell Jeff this, but when we meet Jeff for the second time, we discover that Jeff decided to stab his wife 50 times because he still suspected her of cheating on him. Now that's horrifying, and Jeff is clearly the one at fault here as far as his wife's death is concerned. But where Niko is at fault is in his willingness to help Jeff hide her body. As though he protests a bit here, he goes along with him anyway and proceeds to get rid of Shirley's body, leaving Jeff free to continue living his life in any way he may wish, despite his heinous crime. When Niko encounters him for the third time, Jeff is remarkably already remarried, and he's once again suspicious of his new wife, so he asks Niko to track her, and he then proceeds to ask him to kill her once he discovers she's having lunch with her ex. But despite his willingness to hide Shirley's body, Niko does refuse to kill this new woman for him, which sends Jeff into a rage that ends up getting him killed when he runs into oncoming traffic. A point for Niko there, but it still stands that he was willing to aid a man who murdered an innocent woman. Now, with all these things in mind, we can without a doubt paint Niko Bellic as quite the evildoer, a man who has harmed and killed hundreds in his pursuit to find and bring one single man to justice for the sake of the 12 that he betrayed. And part of the tragedy of Niko's character is that he feels that this is the only option, the only thing that he can do to make things right.
I have not been the same man since the day that Darko betrayed us, since I saw those things.
You lost a lot of friends that day, Niko.
Well, in some way, our friends from the village were lucky. I lost myself that day too. Everything that was good and innocent in me died along with them. If I could live those hours again, I think I would have preferred to be buried in the pit along with everyone else. This is all that is left of me. What am I good at, Roman? What is my trade? I deal in death. Because that is all that is open to me.
I will tell you what you are good at, Niko. You are a good cousin and a good friend. You still have integrity. No matter what you say, there is humanity in you. You still have the power to be good. It's important that you believe that.
Maybe I will start to believe it when Darko is dead. That might give me some perspective.
This killing must stop sometime, Niko. Once this is done, then you must begin to forgive. Think about your future instead of the horrible things that have happened to you. To us, to all of us, in the past.
That is how Niko has felt all these years, like a dead man walking who only feels alive if he's moving towards vengeance. But as Roman points out here, he lost people too. He also suffered the ramifications of that terrible war in so many ways, yet he's able to live his life in a fulfilling way, looking towards the future, even if the past may cause him to turn his head from time to time. But Niko is also that person. He's a human being like any other, who was always capable of finding more in life than revenge, of laughing, of smiling, and enjoying the company of the people he loves. But for some people like Niko Bellic, hatred and rage become all-consuming, eating away all other thoughts and feelings within them, and leaving but scraps to gnaw on as their mind is pointed towards what they believe will relieve them of their immeasurable pain. However, what people like Niko seek is not a cure, it's a placebo, the pot of blood-soaked gold at the end of a rainbow of carnage that they believe will make everything right. But once they reach the end of that rainbow, they discover that no matter what they do, nothing is ever going to erase that pain. After Niko finally discovers that it was Darko Breivik who betrayed him and he's delivered to him, you're given two options as a player. Either you slay him or spare him. If you kill him, Niko shoots 12 bullets into his body, one for each of the friends he betrayed for the paltry sum of $1,000. But once the adrenaline is worn off, this is what Niko has to say to his cousin.
There you go. You got your revenge. How does it feel?
I don't know how it feels. I'm trying to take it all in.
This is the moment you've been waiting for. For so long, Niko. What do you mean you don't know how you feel?
I mean, I don't know. I feel empty, okay? I feel empty.
That's something. At least.
No, Roman. It's nothing. The emptiness is what I was trying to get rid of by finding Darko. I've been empty ever since that day. I thought that revenge, killing Darko, might fill me up a bit, might give me some substance.
And it hasn't?
No, it hasn't. Does that make you happy?
Of course it doesn't make me happy, but maybe this is good for you. Maybe now that you know that revenge is not what you are after, you can look for fulfillment in other places. Healthy ones.
Maybe. Maybe. I don't know.
Hollow, unfulfilled, the pain as present as it ever was, with no relief in sight, and the knowledge he'd wasted years chasing solace that he was never going to find. If you choose to spare him, a similar realization comes to Niko, albeit a much healthier one.
You did the right thing. It is not often that a man can be sure of that. You definitely did the right thing. Be proud of yourself.
Let's have a fucking party. Break out the champagne. I let the diseased, traitorous junkie live after hunting him for over a decade. Shit! Someone hand me the keys to the fucking city.
There's no need to take that tone, cousin.
I'm sorry if my tone offends you, Roman. But this has been a very difficult moment for me. It took every fiber of my being, pulling in the same direction, not to kill Darko, to not get revenge for all those lives he took away.
What made you spare him?
I don't know. I wanted it for so long, he would just be dead. Like everyone else from our village, I was the one that survived the first attack. Living is not easy.
No.
I would live to killing Darko as well. But then when I looked at him, I realized that nothing would change if I killed him. Revenge would not somehow shut the book on what I have seen. Only those who die get closure. Living do not.
So you keep living. And you try to have a happy life. You try to move on.
I tried to. Yes.
Regardless of what you choose, the result is the same. Niko is made to understand that ultimately, his quest for revenge was for nothing, and all the horror he had unleashed over the last decade for the sake of that revenge was pointless, destroying so many lives in the process, and making Niko into a monster of a man. For to find Darko Breivik, Niko became a man much like him, a man who killed for money, but whose pursuit of revenge justified those deaths for him, when in reality, there is no justification for what Niko Bellic did beyond his own desire to satisfy his need for revenge. And in becoming this hypocrisy, he became a man who wasn't much better than the one he so desperately felt he needed to destroy to feel whole. Darko Breivik was a loathsome, repugnant, and evil man who sold out those closest to him for money. And after doing so, he spiraled in much the same way Niko did, albeit for different reasons, as the overwhelming guilt he felt for doing what he had done led him to creating a hell for himself with drugs, rather than hatred. And while Darko may indeed deserve the finality of death, that's exactly what death is. It's final. And perhaps to suffer as a wretch who betrayed those he loved, as well as himself, is a far more fitting punishment for him. Niko, on the other hand, whether you spare him or kill him, continues to live on after the fact, broken once again by either the death of Roman or Kate, depending on the ending you choose, but a man free from his ghosts who is now able to live his life in any way he sees fit, even if, after committing the many crimes he committed to get to this point, he doesn't deserve to do so. In the end, Niko Bellic was a man haunted by his trauma, and you can't blame him for being haunted by it, but you can blame him for choosing to take the path that he walked in an effort to free himself from it, unleashing evil on a massive scale in order to bring himself peace and the peace he felt those who had been slain deserved. But no one that Niko Bellic harmed will likely ever see justice for what he did to them or members of their family. And when you consider all the evil that Niko sowed throughout his decade-long struggle to exact his revenge, it's hard not to declare him to be an evil man in his own right, one who does deserve sympathy for what he's been through, but one whose actions cannot and should not be excused. But Niko is far from being the only evildoer in GTA 4, and so now it's time we move on to discuss the actions and character of some of the other players in this story, starting with Vladimir Glebov. But keep in mind that as we talk about these characters, the same sort of logic applies to them that applies to Niko, that being that the majority of them are guilty of playing the criminal game and committing crimes within the parameters of that game, but that they also cause the deaths of civilians or law enforcement at times. And while most of them don't kill quite as many people as Niko does, that still renders them evildoers of a similar, if not a greater magnitude, which we're more so going to determine by examining their overall characters than by chronicling every single instance of them murdering another criminal or officer of the law. But we will talk about any innocents they happen to harm along the way, if there are any, or any crimes they commit that are particularly egregious. Now Vlad, while not being much more than a footnote in the overall story of GTA 4, is still notable in that he's the first repugnant person we encounter in the main story. Vlad is boorish, brutal, and merciless, a tried and true gangster who's about as scummy as they come. In contrast to Niko, who we can at least say was committing crimes in the pursuit of a macabre form of justice, Vlad is just a repugnant man working a repugnant profession who has little to no respect for anyone or their lives. One who would probably sell out his own mother if it meant he could earn a few dollars. And it shows with his constant beratement of those around him in any way he sees fit, his womanizing, and his utter lack of mercy or sympathy for anyone if they get in the way of his business or otherwise. A cut above Vlad, literally and figuratively, was his boss Mikhail Faustin and his second-in-command and best friend, Dimitri Rascalov, men who, much like Niko, spent their formative years in a country on the decline. In this case, the Soviet Union, meeting one another during their time serving in the Soviet military. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Mikhail and Dimitri turned to selling hashish in Red Square before they eventually made their way to Liberty City, where they established themselves as burgeoning kingpins in the Russian criminal underworld. Over time, Mikhail became disillusioned with the life he lived, likely due to a combination of all the horrid things he'd experienced. The promises of his homeland revealed to be nothing more than lies when the Soviet Union disintegrated, and the realities of both criminal life and life in general in America offering him further disappointment. So Mikhail became a drunk and a drug addict, drowning in rage, sorrow, and the substances he abuses on a daily basis.
He did not used to be like this. When we were young, at home, he was beautiful. He was happy. He made me happy. But then something changed, years ago. I never quite knew what it was. So many years I wondered what it was, or what was wrong with me, that I did not see it in him. Or I changed him.
By the time we meet Mikhail, he is a man very much on the decline, one who has a my way or the highway attitude, no matter the consequences his actions might bring to him, his organization, or his family. Mikhail prefers to rule through violence and fear, and his stubbornness in regards to his business decisions and refusal to see reason have greatly damaged his reputation and standing within his own organization. He's violent with his wife and denigrates his daughter for becoming what he views as a worthless whore. But as much as he lashes out at those around him, he also deeply desires that they love and respect him. But the tragedy of his character is that every insult that spills from his mouth and every violent action he takes or orders gets him further and further away from becoming the man he wants to be seen as, which is only made worse by his propensity to hold everything he's done for them over their heads. He claims at several points that everyone around him wouldn't be or have anything if it weren't for him. And while that's true to a certain extent, especially as far as protecting Dimitri in prison goes or providing for his family, at the same time, that doesn't mean they owe him their entire lives, and he gets to dictate their lives just because he provided things for them. However, he does have a point about American greed, how it poisons people, and that he's not the only one to blame here, as Dimitri did indeed end up betraying him. But pressure is ultimately what ruined Mikhail Faustin. The pressures of being a father and a husband, the pressures of running an organization built upon brutality, and the pressures of making a life in a strange land that he felt had destroyed him as well as many of those around him. So the last days of Mikhail Faustin were defined by paranoia, recklessness, and wanton violence, all of which contributed to his greatest friend and veritable handler, Dimitri, conspiring to have him murdered, leaving behind a traumatized and abused wife to clean up the mess that her husband made her and her daughter's life into. But as Niko is pursuing him before he kills him, Mikhail remarked how America had ruined Dimitri, and so it very well might have, for out of all the criminal elements we encounter in this story, Dimitri is one of the worst of the bunch. Unlike Mikhail, who had a certain sense of honor and duty towards those in his employ and in his family, Dimitri reveals to us that he has no allegiance to anyone but himself, a man alone who fancies himself a great criminal mastermind who's ready to take control of the entirety of Liberty City, seemingly just because he believes he can. And in truth, Dimitri was quite the cunning strategist, outmaneuvering several different people and organizations to make himself into this gangland powerhouse. But Dimitri was nothing more than a refined Vladimir Glebov, a brutish, disgusting man who could only cultivate loyalty with money, who made enemies with every move that he made, and one who would betray anyone if it meant enriching or empowering himself in any way. And regardless of whether or not he meets his end aboard the platypus at Niko's hand, or on Happiness Island through the same method, Dimitri dies as a result of his own hubris and arrogance, leaving behind the legacy of a traitor whose story is best forgotten. Now Vlad, Mikhail, and Dimitri had some serious flaws, and well, so do the rest of the characters we're going to talk about, but there are a few who aren't quite as reprehensible as the rest. One of those people is little Jacob. As though he is indeed a gangster, drug dealer, and murderer, overall, he's a rather nice guy. He doesn't betray anyone in this story, and he's only ever helpful to Niko and anyone else he comes into contact with. That doesn't excuse the fact that he is who he is, and he's done what he's done, as he does tag along on several missions with Niko and kills quite a few people. But he, and by proxy his friend Badman, are definitely towards the bottom of the totem pole here as far as evil goes. The same can be said for Brucie, a man who's an egomaniac and grade A douchebag who lives fast and hard, but one who, when it comes down to it, is far and away from being as much of a reprehensible human being as someone like Dimitri Rascalov. Still a criminal who kills and steals to get what he wants, and he's damn annoying to boot, but relatively speaking, he isn't so bad, especially when you consider that he's probably only the way that he is because of his much worse older brother, who Brucie likely grew up envying and emulating in any way that he could to gain his favor. But we'll talk about the stain on humanity that is IV Kibbutz a little later on. Another character that's arguably just as bad as people like Mikhail and Dimitri, as far as criminal activity goes, but who is a much better person, is Elizabeta Torres, a ruthless woman who does what she has to do to maintain her status as a drug lord in a traditionally male-dominated field, but one who seems to have a certain degree of integrity and honor that many of her contemporaries don't have. She does like her substances much like Mikhail did, and she's prone to acting on her impulses as a result, like when she killed Manny and his cameraman. Though Manny's loss isn't what I would call a great tragedy, the loss of his cameraman might be, as we don't know how involved he was in Manny's business. But regardless, Elizabeta is also a woman with a complex history who entered into this game as a result of a terrible upbringing that pushed her into becoming who she is. As during The Lost and the Damned, she admits to Johnny that when she was 14, a man tried to abuse her and force her into becoming a prostitute, but instead, she fed him his balls, which is a traumatic thing for a 14-year-old to have to experience, both the abuse and the violence she was forced to inflict upon this man to defend herself. Regardless, Elizabeta, like so many people that follow a lifestyle like hers, eventually ends up suffering the consequences of that lifestyle and earning herself what we can assume to be a lengthy stint in prison, after which we never hear from Elizabeta again. Now, speaking of Manny Escuela, Manny is one of the most reprehensible characters we encounter in this story, and that's because he's a manipulative fraud who claims to be cleaning up the streets of Liberty City and giving back to the community after living a life of crime, but in reality is doing the exact opposite, as Manny is all about himself and his reputation, projecting himself as this benevolent man who's trying to make up for his past mistakes, but who is actually doing whatever he can to make sure his image is as pristine as he wants it to be, regardless of whether or not he hurts or helps people in the process, which includes continuing to commit crimes in an effort to do so, either ordering Niko to murder several people or doing so himself. And as I mentioned a moment ago, Manny is essentially responsible for the death of his cameraman, and it's rather sad that the antics of such a repugnant man earned a more or less innocent man a death sentence at the hands of a hopped-up drug lord. Manny only ever looked out for Manny, and because he was this man who presented himself as being a benevolent man, who in reality was not much better or even worse than the people he claimed were destroying his city, Manny will go down as being one of the most deplorable characters to ever grace the GTA universe, even if he may not have committed as many crimes as others may have. Now, in a similar vein as Manny, we have Playboy X, who's even a rung lower than Manny himself, as even though Manny is definitely not helping out his community like he says he is, at least he's trying to play the part somewhat convincingly. Playboy, on the other hand, is all talk and no game, a man who's truly out for himself, who doesn't care about anyone else in the slightest, and who will use people so long as he gets what he wants. Playboy claims that he's going to make it big and be the biggest there ever was, and only after he gets what he feels he deserves is he going to help people in need, which isn't exactly unreasonable, but when it's coming out of the mouth of Playboy X, it certainly is, as there's no doubt in my mind that Playboy never had a single concrete plan in his mind to help anyone but himself, even if he did somehow obtain infinite wealth. Playboy constantly lies, whether to make himself look better or to manipulate people, like he does with Niko when things steadily go more and more south after his old mentor Dwayne Forge is released from prison, to the point that he tries to convince Niko that Dwayne is out to get both of them and that he needs to kill him in order to prevent that. According to Dwayne though, Dwayne played a sizable role in making Playboy into the man he is in this story, as he was apparently quite book smart when he was younger. But after being taken under Dwayne's wing, he steadily learned the rules of the game and became the man he is today. But that doesn't excuse his two-faced nature and the fact that he's hesitant to assist a man who by all rights he should consider family following his release from prison. And much like Manny, we often find Playboy working to harm or kill anyone who might besmirch his reputation in any way, even if they happen to be right. During the Holland Play mission, we're given a choice to kill either Playboy or Dwayne, and if we kill Dwayne on Playboy's behalf, once Niko calls him to confirm the deed has been done, he dares to admonish Niko for killing him, saying that he's cold and doesn't know if he can associate with someone like him, which only further damns Playboy's character and puts him right alongside Manny as one of the most reprehensible players in this story. Speaking of Dwayne though, he's one of the characters in GTA 4 that's the most decent. Like many of the characters in this story, Dwayne experienced quite a lot of hardship in his youth, with his abusive, illiterate, and extremely violent pimp of a father constantly abusing both him and his mother verbally and physically, at one point even witnessing his father beating his mother with a set of golf clubs she had purchased for him until he'd broken them over her back. After his father had been killed by drug dealers he attempted to rip off, Dwayne, who had just experienced the death of his father, wasn't fazed in the slightest, having no sympathy for a man who had treated him so cruelly. Despite this tough upbringing though, Dwayne was determined to become a man who in many ways was the antithesis of his father, a police officer. But during the era where he attempted to do so, 1980s Liberty City, the discrimination against black officers in the LCPD ensured that this dream would be forever closed off to Dwayne. So, without any direction and a lack of options, he chose to do what many around him were doing, deal drugs, and he did so well, creating an empire so vast that he had apartments filled with cash throughout the city. However, despite his success, Dwayne wasn't altogether happy as a drug lord, as he was constantly paranoid and angry as he navigated this treacherous world he inhabited. But Dwayne was eventually betrayed by one of his dealers, Javon Simpson, who not only turned him into the police, but stole his girlfriend Charisse as well. And while he was in prison, his paranoia and rage turned instead into depression, to the point that Dwayne made frequent attempts on his own life while inside and was placed on watch for a sizable amount of his sentence. After getting out though, Dwayne seemed to have a renewed outlook on life, understanding that all he had done was ultimately bad, and that he'd caused far more harm to his friends, family, and neighbors than good. Still desiring to have his needs taken care of regardless, he went to Playboy to get back some of what he had earned and what he was owed. But as we discussed, Playboy wasn't one to hand over anything that he felt was his, even if he'd taken it from a man he loved. Now, though Dwayne did indeed turn over a new leaf following his release, he still made efforts to get revenge on those who had wronged him, including Javon and Charisse, the Trunches brothers, who had taken over a strip club he owned while he was incarcerated, and Playboy. That being said, despite these actions, or the actions he orders Niko to take, Dwayne is one of the more sympathetic and relatable characters in this story, and with the combination of his terrible upbringing, the terrible things he did, and the betrayals by those around him, he has become a jaded, cynical, and lonely man. A man much like Niko Bellic, who, if he interacts with Dwayne enough, becomes one of his closest, truest, and only friends. A man whose actions shouldn't be excused, but one who is definitely a cut above the rest as far as overall character is concerned, to the point that this is one of the few people that Niko genuinely feels sad about killing if you decide to kill Dwayne for Playboy. However, if we circle back to reprehensible characters, we need look no further than Eddie Lowe to find the worst of the worst. Eddie isn't a main character in this story. In fact, he's a completely optional side character. But there's a good argument to be made that Eddie is the most evil character in this story. For unlike the other criminals we encounter here, Eddie doesn't do anything he does for money. He does it because he's a ruthless and remorseless serial killer who enjoys killing people purely for his own satisfaction. That being said, like a lot of the criminals we encounter in this story, as well as nearly every serial killer who's ever lived, Eddie's backstory is filled with a heap of tragedy. Some of which we learn through his dialogue, but most of which we glean from his blog over on blogsnobs.org and his page on myroomonline.net. Here Eddie talks about how he was abused physically, verbally, and sexually by his mother and father, made to dress like a girl by his father, murdered his brother, was made fun of in school for the size of his penis, spent time in an asylum or correctional facility, murdered possibly hundreds of people, keeps their organs and limbs as trophies, fornicates with animals and dead bodies, and lives in a filth-ridden home where he vomits and defecates everywhere. Suffice it to say that Eddie Lowe had a horrific upbringing that translated into him becoming an equally horrific man. And in this story, his primary fixation at the moment seems to be with murdering joggers, and it's after he's killed one and is looking to dispose of their remains that Niko finds Eddie Lowe, who he ends up eventually killing, or attempting to kill, as it's possible that Eddie escapes and continues to maim, torture, abuse, and murder countless more people and animals. But regardless of his fate, Eddie, as a serial killer who's harmed and murdered hundreds of people, is without a doubt the most evil character in this story, albeit one who was very much made to be this way and deserves sympathy in that regard. But that sympathy means little in the face of the overwhelming amount of repugnant crimes he committed over the course of his life. Now, a mixed bag as far as characters go are the members of the McReary crime family. One of the oldest crime families in Liberty City, the McRearys are a family who, according to Packy, once ran this city long ago, but they now languish as a minor footnote in its history as an organization that's but a shadow of its supposed former glory. Packy explains that the family wasn't able to retain its influence because its members were more concerned with spending their money on women, alcohol, and drugs than they were with expanding their influence. And considering the family was once headed by a Mr. McReary, father of the McReary family members we meet in this story, as well as the husband of Maureen McReary, that only makes sense, as Packy explains at one point that Mr. McReary was a severe alcoholic, one who Packy admitted molested him and his brother Jerry, and took his own life sometime during their youth. It's this world headed by this deplorable man that the McReary brothers were born into, and as a result, they are all, save for one, consumed by a desire to restore their family to a position of strength as they toil for it as armed robbers, drug dealers, hired guns, and kidnappers. And each of them, when looking through their profiles on the LCPD database, all have criminal records stretching back to when they were essentially children. With Derek first getting picked up by the police for disorderly conduct in 1970 when he was 14, Gerald for grand larceny in 1986 when he was 13, and Packy, while his record started in 1997, claimed to have begun spotting for Gerald's scores when he was in middle school. Gerald, the second eldest, is a rather bitter and angry man who orchestrates many a violent endeavor for his associates to accomplish, with a plot to destabilize the Ancelotti family by orchestrating a fake hit on them by their Albanian associates with Jimmy Pegorino, and the kidnapping of Gracie Ancelotti to further this design. Gerald also likely had a hand in planning the robbery of the Bank of Liberty, a shipment of medication from the Triads, and an Ancelotti warehouse, all of which were partially carried out by Packy with the assistance of other McReary associates, including Niko, as well as his brother Derek on one occasion. Gerald would end up paying dearly for his crimes, however, as out of all the brothers, he was the only one who ended up going to prison for his crimes, though 2 of his other brothers wouldn't exactly meet favorable fates either, like Derek. Derek, though the eldest, has long since relinquished control of the family to his brother Gerald due to his heroin addiction, and the trouble he's gotten himself into with both former associates like Bucky Sligo and Aidan O'Malley, who he fought with in the IRA after leaving for Ireland following a prison stint in the 1980s where he developed his heroin addiction, and who claim he informed on them to the police following a string of armed robberies in the US in the 90s, one of which involved robbing a mob family according to Francis, which sent Derek back to Ireland for many years until he returned during the events of this story. Due to the hardship he's faced over the course of his life, Derek is quite the miserable man, one with many regrets and trauma who continues to use his drug of choice as a crutch to numb his pain. And Derek has the honor of being one of the characters in this story who orders people to be killed, who don't exactly deserve to be killed for the reasons they were killed, those being the aforementioned Bucky Sligo and Aidan O'Malley, whose possible unearned deaths at the hands of Niko we discussed earlier can be largely attributed to Derek. And because Derek is this often cowardly, impulsive, and substance-ridden man, he proves himself to be somewhere in the middle relative to other criminals of his caliber, as far as evil is concerned. Now, Packy seems to have a character and personality that's a combination of both Derek and Gerald's, with a more mild amount of anger compared to Gerald, and a penchant for substance abuse and depression like Derek, as Packy frequently abuses cocaine and admits to Niko that he even harms himself when you're hanging out with him at one point. And due to his heavy involvement in his family's criminal enterprise, Packy is on equal footing to both Derek and Gerald when it comes to evil, as though Packy isn't as cold as Gerald, nor as deplorable as Derek. He's still a man who's committed numerous crimes and murdered many for the sake of his family's business, especially when you consider that both Packy and Derek are responsible for the murder of a more or less innocent, albeit incredibly stupid and arrogant civilian, Eugene Reaper, the man who tries to be a hero and stop the McRearys' bank robbery. But on the whole, Packy does seem to be an all-around better person than both of his brothers were. Francis, on the other hand, is a different story entirely, as he, despite being a police officer and being detached from his family, is without a doubt the worst of the bunch. Francis isn't responsible for committing as many crimes as his brothers are, but he's as corrupt of a police officer as they come, and a man who we can assume is a sexual deviant of the worst kind, who uses his position of authority to do as he pleases, to whomever he pleases. To put it simply, Francis is a worm, and though he hides behind this benevolent persona, he's as seedy and malicious as they come, with his own acts of evil frequently being covered up by Niko, as he's blackmailed by people with knowledge of his various misdeeds.
You know, it's funny, but I see a lot of me in you. You know why?
No.
You know there's no good and no evil. Just shades of fucking gray.
Whatever.
You make things 1% better, that's enough. That's our duty.
If you say so.
Oh, I do say so.
This is the mindset of Francis McReary, and it's one that men like him use often to justify their crimes, as if they're being good guys 10% of the time. It doesn't matter if they're bad 90%. And in truth, these people will often delude themselves into believing they're the inverse, when in fact they aren't. Stains on society who shouldn't be allowed anywhere close to the position of power that Francis nearly finds himself in, that of police commissioner. Whether or not he does is up to you as the player though, as during the mission Blood Brothers, you're given the option to kill either Derek or Francis, who are at odds with one another because Derek plans to talk to a journalist about the family amidst Francis's bid to become a commissioner, and Derek Francis to prevent him from being taken care of. Both brothers aren't the greatest people as we've already covered, but of the two options, I would say that sparing Derek is the better one, considering the harm Francis would be able to do if given such authority. Now, the members of the other crime family we come into frequent contact with in the mainline story, the Pegorino family, are a little more personally reprehensible than most of the members of the McReary family are, with one exception. Phil Bell is, like every other character we've talked about so far, a criminal, and he's more than responsible for committing his fair share of crimes. But on the whole, Phil is the most grounded member of the Pegorino family. He's cordial with Niko, and quite amiable. A loyal and competent man who does his job and plays the part he's supposed to play as best he can. But the other notable members of the family, not so much. Ray Bacino is your classic scummy mobster who will do anything to get ahead, whether it be betraying or taking advantage of those that work for him or who are close to him, like Niko and Ashley, or licking the boots of his superior, Jimmy Pegorino. He's as fake as can be, irritable and impulsive, and brutal as well, as Ray reportedly once fed a manager of one of his trash depots to a garbage truck alive when he held out on profits. While they're not exactly the same, Ray reminds me a lot of Dimitri Rascalov in the way he thinks and acts. But whereas Dimitri initially presented himself as this calm and intelligent man who's trying to do what's best for his friend and organization, Ray presents himself as this big tough guy and your best friend. But in reality, he's nothing more than a slimy snake in the grass who will fill you with poison as soon as you turn your back. And it's precisely these aspects of his nature that earn Ray an untimely end at the hands of Niko Bellic. Now, Jimmy Pegorino, on the other hand, doesn't hide behind any sort of facade. He is who he is at all times, and who he is a whiny braggart who desperately wants to be seen as a big shot in the criminal underworld and to obtain the same status as one of the 5 families. But more than that, Jimmy Pegorino is a moron. The only thing Jimmy Pegorino knows how to do is either suck up to the people he wants to respect him, or brutalize and destroy anyone he believes needs to get out of his way to further his goals, including the members of his own family, who he describes as being disposable and easily replaceable. So why worry about using them for cannon fodder for his various schemes? And just like Ray and the man he would enter into business with, Dimitri Rascalov, Jimmy is more than willing to betray anyone so long as he can get whatever he wants, which ends up backfiring on him in the end when he's either killed by Niko after he attempts to kill him for ruining his deal and accidentally kills Kate, or when Dimitri kills him because Dimitri is also a man who will stop at nothing to get what he wants and doesn't want to share anything with anybody. Jon Gravelli, on the other hand, is without a doubt the most respected and successful criminal in this story, as unlike all the other characters we meet, who either meet their ends or whose fates are left unknown, Jon accomplishes something that few criminals do, dying in a hospital bed rather than in prison or by a bullet. It's safe to say, though, that as the longest-lived character here, Jon is more than likely responsible for unleashing the most evil, as his career spans decades and his influence reaches to the highest levels of power. So whether by his hand directly or through his influence, Jon Gravelli likely had an impact on thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people over the course of his life. But that being said, Jon does point out a sad truth about life in this world we live in, that if he wasn't doing it, somebody else would, so it might as well have been him. That by no means excuses what he's done, but it is an unfortunate aspect of the world that we've created, and one that rings true for nearly every character in this story. Now, there is one more person that Niko encounters that I'd like to talk about, Agent ULP, but the role he plays here is best discussed when we talk about some of the overarching themes of this story later on. So for now, let's move on and start discussing another of our protagonists, Johnny Klebitz. Vice President of the Lost MC, Johnny is a man caught between a rock and a hard place. As an outlaw motorcycle club, the Lost is heavily centered around personal freedom, an organization one can join where they can find for themselves the family they may have never had, and a place where they can do what they want to when they want to in service to their brothers, and otherwise, as they enjoy the protection that only an organization like this can provide. Due to this, members of gangs like the Lost tend to be a bit wild, living as fast as their bikes will allow them to, as they become the living embodiment of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Johnny is a man who enjoys all of these things, and he especially enjoyed them during his youth. But as he's grown older and witnessed the toll a life like his takes on a person and the people around them, Johnny has become less reckless and more mindful of his and his brother's safety, security, and future, wishing to push the Lost into becoming more business-oriented and stable, rather than focusing their efforts on operating in any way they might like to in any given moment. As after years of witnessing harm come to the people he cares for, whether that be physically, through drug use, or incarceration, Johnny is ready to see the Lost enter a new era. Unfortunately for him, though, he's only the vice president, and at the time The Lost in the Dam begins, interim president while the real head of the Lost, Billy Gray, was in rehab, and so whatever changes Johnny wanted to make were quickly rendered null and void upon Billy's release. After he was released, Johnny and the rest of the Lost were taken on a veritable rollercoaster ride as Billy regained control, as Billy was the embodiment of exactly what Johnny was trying to steer the Lost away from, a man who lives only for thrills, the thrill of drugs, the hunt, and the kill, with his actions as leader only emboldened by his toady Brian, who, desiring to be something, but incapable of being anybody without hanging on to somebody else's coattails, acquiesces to and emboldens Billy every chance he gets. Brian is an appropriate companion for Billy, though, as Billy is another one of those treacherous characters who will do whatever it takes to make sure the people under his care, or who he sees as enemies, are eliminated, which we see through his ruthless campaign against the Angels of Death, and his willingness to betray Johnny to both the Triads and the government following his incarceration. But unlike Billy and Brian, a man like Johnny, and those allied with him like Angus and Jim, understand that there's such a thing as too much freedom. For is being completely free worth the price that comes with it? In this case, crippling drug addictions, death, or a life spent behind bars, as one's recklessness inevitably draws the attention of the authorities. For some, maybe, but for those wishing to live a long and happy life, not so much. And though Johnny and his chapter of the Lost live to fight another day after they exact their revenge against Billy, they're still a long way away from escaping the blood-soaked road they've ridden their bikes on for so long. As far as evil goes, Billy is without a doubt the worst offender in this chapter of the story, with Brian coming in at a close second. But just like Niko, Johnny is a man who has some sympathetic qualities and aspirations, but at the end of the day, he's a criminal all the same. One who murders dozens of people playing the same game he is, dozens more who are trying to put a stop to that game. Thomas Stubbs' uncle Arthur Stubbs, who may or may not have been innocent to a degree. Dan, an innocent lawyer who was making a case against the very corrupt Stubbs, and he even facilitates, albeit unintentionally, the release of Curtis Stalker when he's conducting a jailbreak for some criminals Thomas Stubbs wanted freed. A cannibalistic serial killer who's likely just as bad, or perhaps even worse, than Eddie Lowe. But again, that's one of the greatest fallacies of criminality, as you don't just harm the people you're intending to harm, but through collateral damage as well, and releasing a man from prison like Curtis Stalker is a heavy amount of collateral damage. So while we might be able to find sympathy for a man who tried to make himself into something more and steer those he loved away from the destructive path they were on, he, like all those we have and will discuss in this video, is still guilty of unleashing quite a lot of evil, and that's something that cannot and should not be excused. Now, I mentioned Thomas Stubbs a moment ago, but just like Agent ULP, we'll be talking about him a little later on. So now let's turn our focus to the characters we meet in the Ballad of Gay Tony. Our hero of this chapter of the story, Luis Lopez, experienced great hardship during his youth due to his father's abandonment of his family while he was still young, giving Luis no positive male role models in his life, which caused him to enter into a life of crime in an effort to aid his mother and to appease the friends around him who influenced him into becoming a gangster, earning Luis a couple stints in prison after he shot a teacher for groping his sister when he was 17, and for Grand Theft Auto just a year later. Unfortunately for Luis, despite the aid he provides his mother, he has a shoddy relationship with her as well, which in large part is due to his status as a criminal. But even so, she's a paradox in that she'll scold Luis for being who he is, but will also deride him if he doesn't succeed in his profession as well, like after the fight you enter on her behalf, where if you lose, she'll tell you that she's disappointed in you because she doesn't want any losers in the family. More than that though, she doesn't bat an eye when it comes time to accept Luis's money, and while you can't blame a mother for wanting her son to better himself, at the same time, it's hard to say she has the right to criticize him for what he does when she's directly benefiting from it, especially when you consider that both his brother and sister have left him holding the bag so to speak when it comes to caring for their mother, with his brother adding even more fuel to the fire here with his condemnation of Luis, despite his willful absence from their family affairs. But luckily, and in some ways unluckily for Luis, he ends up finding a guiding influence outside his inner circle that allowed him to escape the trap that people like his friends Armando and Enrique fell prey to, where they believe that there's nothing for them beyond the life they're accustomed to and all the terrible things that come with it. And that man's name was Tony Prince, otherwise known as Gay Tony. Under Tony's tutelage, Luis went from being just your run-of-the-mill hood and drug dealer to becoming the right-hand man and business partner of one of, if not the most successful club owner in Liberty City. While this new position certainly enhanced Luis's life in many ways, it also put him in a rather unfortunate position, as though Tony was indeed a successful man. He was also an impulsive and reckless man with a substance abuse problem, who frequently made decisions without Luis that either harmed himself, Luis, or their business. And when they do, Luis ends up being the one that has to clean them up. And though he does so reluctantly most of the time, he isn't exactly an amateur when it comes to getting down to business, as Luis, much like Johnny and Niko, is a bona fide killing machine who shows little to no remorse for murdering people or committing crimes. Despite this, he is loyal to the people closest to him and does everything he can to protect them, even if they aren't deserving of it at times, like his aforementioned protection of Gay Tony, his mother, and anyone else who he becomes close with, like Yusuf Amir and even Brucie Kibbutz, who he defends against his extremely repugnant brother Maury a few different times. So much like Johnny and Niko, despite his sympathetic qualities, Luis is still an evil man, a criminal of the highest order who's responsible for the deaths of countless people throughout this story that both deserve it and don't. And the major characters he encounters aren't much better either. Yusuf Amir, despite having the potential to be the most influential character we encounter due to his affluence, is ironically the most tame of the bunch. He's loud, ignorant, and childish, but at his core, he's a man who wants to make a name for himself, impress his father, and gather as many toys as his wealth will allow him to. As after buying everything he possibly could, Yusuf finds himself more so interested in the things that he can't buy, which leads him to recruiting Luis to help him acquire increasingly more outlandish illegal weapons and vehicles to pad his collection, which on one occasion leads to the death of an all-around repugnant man by the name of Frickie von Hardenberg, who financed countless conflicts around the world and was involved in human trafficking and the slave trade. Maury Kibbutz, on the other hand, is nothing short of human scum, a douchebag of the highest order whose history includes serving in the IDF, abusing and traumatizing his younger brother, and committing numerous crimes to pad his own ego so he might ease the symptoms of his malignant little man syndrome. And as it turns out, Maury, despite his showboating, proves himself to be an apex pussy when Bruce hits him in the face just once, which prompts Maury to cry and Brucie to beg him not to tell their mom, which sounds on brand for the pathetic slimeball. Unfortunately, Maury is one of the characters in this story who gets to live on and continue being the scumbag that he is, as after the Ballad of Gay Tony is concluded, Maury calls Luis to apologize, which is nice, but then he lets him know that he's moved to a real kibbutz, which is a Jewish community that's designed to be a self-sustaining commune based around farming. But because Maury is Maury, he's twisted it for his own gain and has started running it for a profit, deriding what these people do as communism and surely believing that his benevolent presence has only improved their lives. Rocco Pelosi is another rather repugnant character, a man very similar to Ray Pacino in some ways, albeit more bold and reckless with his words and actions. Your typical braggart and wannabe tough guy, Rocco is about as evil as the rest of the gangsters in this story, though he does earn a spot as one of the characters who potentially has a hand in harming several innocents, as he's the one who, on behalf of the Ancelotti crime family, orders Tony to blow up a crane, subway, and plane to assassinate some union officials and make it look like a terrorist attack in the process, all of which could have killed dozens of innocent people. But despite who he is, Rocco is let go by Luis after he conspires with him and his uncle to kill Tony. Now, though he plays quite the important role in Niko Bellic's story, Ray Bulgarin is a man who plays an even larger role in this chapter of GTA 4, as it's here that we get to witness Bulgarin in action on a more personal level. And that's terrible, just like Bulgarin. We already know via Niko that he's a ruthless human trafficker and smuggler with vast resources, who will stop at nothing to get his revenge on anyone who's wronged him. But through Luis's interactions with him, we learn that he's also a money-grubbing, superficial, and callous man filled to the brim with rage, who has little impulse control and an absolute lack of remorse for anyone, be they enemy or ally, as at one point, Bulgarin may have very well killed his sister Galina when he shot a bullet through the ceiling at her during an argument they were having. He contracts Luis to complete several jobs designed to acquire more wealth, in this case, an entire hockey team, and in the process, dozens more people die as a result of his desire to acquire more material things, all while he's slowly trying to poison Luis against Tony in order to recruit him into his gang. But knowing that Luis had a hand in stealing his diamonds, Bulgarin was never going to let him live, a double betrayal that brought about an end for Bulgarin that anyone could have predicted. For a man like him with a temper so great, a focus on all things material, and a complete lack of respect for those who work for him was always destined to meet such an end. Now those were most of the major players in GTA 4, and some were definitely worse than others, but all of them, every single last one of them, is evil to a certain extent, and none of them should go unpunished for the many crimes they commit, though unfortunately, many do, as is the case in our own world. But aside from being criminals, all of these characters, with a few exceptions, have a couple things in common. First and foremost, most of them come from backgrounds that significantly impacted their trajectory in life. There are people like Yusuf Amir who don't even know the meaning of struggle. But on the whole, either the characters in this story grew up in some of the worst parts of Liberty City and were shaped into the criminals they became by their environment and the people in it, or they came from impoverished areas of their home countries, some of which were war-torn, or on the decline, with all of them either experiencing terrible living conditions, significant amounts of abuse, or immense trauma that damaged them more than they could ever know. And after living through that, they then came to America to pursue the American dream. But they did so whilst eking out their existence in the aforementioned worst parts of the city they arrived in. And with a lack of real opportunities for them, they too would fall prey to the allure of crime and the quick riches it could offer them. But one of the overarching themes of GTA 4 that most of these characters embody to a certain extent is that of hypocrisy. Each one of the people we discussed are criminals with dreams and aspirations that are either made nigh unachievable by the fact that they're pursuing this life, or by how they handle their criminal aspirations, making them either bona fide hypocrites, or their actions hypocritical in that they constantly undermine their own aspirations by sabotaging themselves in so many ways. Niko hunted a man who killed his friends for money by killing exponentially more people for money. Men like Vladimir Glebov, Ray Bulgarin, and Dimitri Rascalov wanted all the power and money they could handle, but they made sure with every step they took on other people's toes that their desires became more and more out of their reach. Men like Brucie and Kibbutz, Yusuf Amir, Ray Bacino, Jimmy Pegorino, Mikhail Faustin, Playboy X, and Manny Escuela wanted to be respected, to have people appreciate them and what they do for people. But they made themselves unworthy of respect or appreciation by being so self-centered and self-righteous. Johnny Klebitz and Luis Lopez wanted to create better lives for the people around them, but they did so by making the lives of others worse, and theirs as a result, which is something that the various members of the McRearys family did as well, as they lowered themselves in order to restore their former glory. Billy Gray wanted to be free and espoused the glory of that freedom every chance he could, but when it came time to stick by his code, his self-centered nature ensured he would fail. So hypocrisy is everywhere in GTA 4, and while these individuals embody it to varying degrees, it's not just the people who are hypocritical, but the setting they find themselves in as well. Liberty City is a place where so many people from across the world first arrived to pursue the fabled American dream, and as a result, it's a place where you can find a few, if not several hundred or thousand people from nearly every country across the world living alongside each other, giving the city a unique look and feel that you'd be hard-pressed to find anywhere else. And as they attempt to make their way to that fabled dream, tens of thousands of individuals have come along who attempt to do so by any means necessary, resulting in a city that is often plagued by a heavy amount of crime that in some cases is sanctioned and condoned by those at the top and those who are supposed to be fighting said criminal elements. As though the murder of many law enforcement officials we see happening throughout this story aren't excusable, there are people like Francis McReary and Ed McCornish and Jimmy Matthews who use their positions of authority to become criminals themselves, representing a corrupt, negligent, and ineffective police department that often fails to prevent or stop any crimes that may arise, even when it comes to serial killers like Eddie Lowe, where the detective in charge of finding him is more concerned with making a movie about his story than he is with catching him, as we see in an article in the Liberty City Post. Now, the Grand Theft Auto series has always done a fantastic job of parodying America and its fallacies, and the Liberty City we see in this story is a microcosm of America, or the idea of America as a whole, a place where all people come together to live in both harmony and disharmony as they navigate a world filled with blatant and over-the-top consumerism, exploitation, crime, racism, and political and government manipulation, excesses, and overreaches. But the Liberty City we see in this story is not just a microcosm of America, but specifically a microcosm of America as it was in the mid to late aughts. In an age where the internet has just begun to become something more widely available, we're shown the many horrendous things wrong with a society that has prioritized vanity and profits over all else. On the web, we can find such lovely websites as designerslave.com, a place where you can find the latest knockoff designer clothes that are handmade for you by the hard-working hands of children in sweatshops all across the world. But if you can't fit into your new clothes, you can head over to bulimialovers.com, where you can get some advice on how to make sure you look as good as the advertisements and reality shows tell you need to be if you want to be worth anything at all. After that, you can head on over to ourownreality.com to get the latest scoop on all the celebrity gossip you need to get your mind focused on what really matters, the lifestyles of the rich and famous, who you should feel in awe of and inferior to simultaneously, so you can make sure you're living your life to the fullest. But don't forget to click on the many ads you encounter along the way so you can make sure you have access to the best healthcare, get-rich-quick schemes, and even babies, which you can order custom-made on eugenicsincorporated.com or order from babiesovernight.com. There are many more websites found on the internet here that lampoon American culture and business practices in so many ways, and as much as they are parodies of what you can find in our world, they still highlight the various detrimental aspects of our society that have and continue to affect us in so many ways, pushing you to focus on what's new, hip. And cheap to supposedly better your life, to distract you from what's really going on in the world, all while convincing you to never care about where any of these things come from, or why people want you to have them, or be who they think you should be. You go into debt to afford the latest and greatest craze, because that's what you're told you need to live a fulfilling life, and you remain a happily distracted slave to that debt, as flashing lights and sculpted bodies are paraded in front of your eyes to keep your dopamine levels high enough to cloud your mind. Sentiments which were summed up quite well by Niko during a few conversations with Roman.
What do you think about America, Niko? Tell me straight. You love it, no?
I don't know, Roman. It is the same as any other place, only louder. People don't know how to shut up here.
I bet you would like to teach them, wouldn't you, cousin? But you can't. Or at least you can't teach everyone. Really, you don't like it? The lights, the titties, the food, the opportunities? Come on, Niko, it's kind of incredible.
It's stupid. Everything is just advertising with nothing to back it up. They tell you you're eating the best burger ever. And you believe it until you're sweating out all the chemicals in it and the hormones are making your balls feel funny.
My balls feel fine, but I did notice my man tits getting larger when I was eating a Cluckenbell every day.
Everything else is fake too. The titties aren't real, and the opportunities aren't opportunities at all. To seize them, you end up in so much debt that you'll be a slave for the rest of your life.
I cannot believe what you are saying. Do you seriously mean that you don't like fake titties, cousin?
Seriously.
But aside from the increasing focus on glitz, glamour, and consumerism as the key to true happiness, there is one thing that arguably defined the overall climate of this era more than anything else: terrorism. The people who control the American government at any given time, like nearly all people who control every government across the world, have always relied on an enemy they can present to either the entire populace or certain sections of the populace in order to advance their own agendas in various ways. For quite a long time, that enemy for America was communism, and having such an all-encompassing boogeyman at the forefront of American foreign and domestic policy allowed all manner of injustices to occur at home and across the world. However, after the Cold War ended, that enemy had all but become a non-factor in the eyes of most people. But a new, and in many ways more readily threatening one would present itself soon enough: terrorism, something that became the latest and greatest threat to America after the horror that was 9/11. And like in our own world during this time period, in the world of GTA 4, terrorism is very much the focus of the government, media, and law enforcement, legitimately so, but also as a scapegoat. There are several instances where we combat real terrorism in this story, namely through the missions Niko is assigned by Agent ULP, wherein we take out several nefarious actors who are engaged in financing terrorism both at home and abroad. And the threat that terrorists pose to innocent people all across the world cannot be understated or excused in any way. But there are also several times where we see or hear terrorism being used as a tool to instill hysteria and fear within the populace, even when it isn't applicable, as is the case several times after missions where we cause some sort of havoc or mayhem, where we subsequently hear on the news that what occurred is suspected to be a part of some terrorist plot, when we know for a fact that they aren't. Both fabricated and real sensationalism like this is what then allows people with power to manipulate people and policies in so many ways that further empowers and enriches themselves, which is made no more evident for us than with the Jingoism Act we learn of in the game, an act that's nearly identical to the Patriot Act that allowed for increased inroads into the private lives of American citizens for the purpose of fighting and eradicating terrorism. But perhaps most importantly, to maintain the status quo that allows the wealthy and powerful to stay wealthy and powerful. This is perhaps best exemplified for us by the aforementioned Agent ULP, who uses people with something to lose, but not much to live for, like Michelle and Niko, and the excuse of fighting terrorism several times throughout this story as justification for the numerous missions he sends Niko on behalf of the US government and its covert interests. He does seem to legitimately be sending Niko on missions that involve taking down people associated with terrorist organizations. But Agent ULP is just as concerned about upholding the current social order as he is with fighting real terrorists, as he'll talk about defending the country from legitimate terrorism in one breath, while singing the praises of drug use to control powerful people, whilst rubbing elbows with the mob in another. But if Agent ULP is maintaining the status quo by carrying out and overseeing the government's dirty work, then it's the politicians and government officials who provide the framework for that status quo. Through the character Congressman Thomas Stubbs, we're given an example of how a lot of politicians are more or less playing for the same team while pretending to be in opposition to each other. And that team isn't Team America, but Team Money and Power. Stubbs himself is another one of those hypocrites, a man who pretends to be for the people, but one who is only doing what he does for himself and his bank account, and he doesn't care in the slightest who he has to kill or order to be killed along the way. But you only see this side of Thomas Stubbs if you know him personally. As for the average person, it's the image that he projects that highlights the hypocrisy of who he is, and we're given an excellent example of this, as well as the reality of corrupt politics in America via his website. Thomas Stubbs wants to use insider experience to bring an end to bipartisan politics. Thomas Stubbs stands up to terrorists by ensuring the homeland is protected and by engaging in a sensible dialogue with like-minded individuals. Thomas Stubbs is concerned about the environment, but not at the expense of economic development or our energy needs. Thomas Stubbs is pro-choice, apart from when to be so would harm the unborn baby or his chances in an election. Thomas Stubbs is pro-gay, apart from when it suits him to be pro-family. Marriage is about a union between Adam and Steve, and not between two men. Civil partnerships are what matters, and that's different in a lot of important ways. Thomas Stubbs invented a lot of things, including penicillin, the internet, and disposable diapers. Thomas Stubbs wants to help out Main Street and big business by giving tax breaks to people. Thomas Stubbs is a patriot who believes in a military that has an increased advertising budget. Thomas Stubbs has the plan that will solve healthcare once and for all. Vote for him, and you may find out what it is. Thomas Stubbs comes from a long line of politicians, but also represents the common man and equal opportunities. Thomas Stubbs will help bring campaign reform to government by reforming the way people campaign. Thomas Stubbs is a patriot who is also a citizen of the world. With Thomas Stubbs, what you see is really what you get. If we go over to his How to Get Involved tab, it reads, "Politics is a great way for you to give back to your country, and by give back, we mean money. Or you could be one of those idiots with clipboards standing in the street, getting on everybody's nerves. In general, though, they don't make much difference, as people tend not to listen to people with so little going on in their lives that they like standing in the rain with a clipboard. The most effective way to involve yourself in politics is to make a donation to someone like me, a rich guy with a big heart who cannot be bought for as little money as you are likely to offer. Unless you are, say, an oil company or a nuclear power station or something, in which case, I probably can be bought, so give me a call." The Our Policy tab reads, "We won't reveal too many policy secrets just yet, but trust us, we've got some great ideas that our opponents would steal if they knew them, including how to solve all of your problems." Again, obviously this is a parody, but this website is a more blatant example of what we hear the likes of Mayor Julio Ochoa, a Democrat, who leans into the terrorism hysteria by closing bridges in Liberty City and later reopening them, devising a plan to flood the subway to rid the city of so-called undesirables, and associating with the mafia, and Republican Deputy Mayor Bryce Dawkins, who pretends to champion conservative causes and frequently criticizes the LGBTQ+ community whilst maintaining a relationship with Bernie Crane and using drugs, which highlights for us the fact that there are some people on the right championing traditional family values and conservative morals at City Hall while blowing their boyfriends and doing lines in apartments 3 blocks away. And there are some on the left who are championing the plight of the downtrodden and conducting photo ops with the disenfranchised, who are then rushing off to sip champagne with celebrities at galas as soon as they dust the grime off their suit jackets. Make no mistake, there are good people in the American government on both sides who truly do stand up for what they believe in and make efforts to better the lives of the common man. But there are far too many who aren't. And GTA 4 does a great job at pointing out the hypocrisy of both the media and politics from all directions, as both prominent political news outlets in this universe, Weasel News for the right and PLR for the left, are guilty of being just as hypocritical and fear-mongering as the aforementioned politicians are. And this is especially true for both politicians and media in regard to the idea that more often than not, both sides posture for the purpose of advancing their own agendas, but that these agendas rarely have anything to do with the common man. Unless there's profits to be had, of course. In the end, the evil present in GTA 4 is all-encompassing and all too real. Evil that comes from one's environment, the people around them, and the actions a person takes, like so much evil does. And while many of these people we find within have some sympathy to be found in their backstories, and the world they live in is made ever worse for them by the people who have power over them, in the end, what they are and what they've become is no excuse for what they've done and the many lives they've harmed as they've done so. Criminals one and the same who reap what they sow and find themselves, in one way or another, succumbing to evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on GTA 4? Did I miss anything? Let me know in the comments and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and especially our Dark Lord patrons, Elijah KVA, Mr. Awesome, Louis Doxtator, Just Keeping It Real, Lachlan, Atris Rain, Seltsopa, Him Downstairs, Oh God Why, Beep Boop, Lorenzo Antonino, Eli Livingston, Moondog, and Roberto Hernandez. And a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.